I stood alone in the parking lot close to midnight, still gripping the box of Ethan's favorite food. The cold slipped through my collar and made me shiver, even though my car window was only cracked open. The light from his office floor was on, glowing in a strange way, a lone strip of yellow in a row of buildings already dark. My breath kept catching, not because of the cold, but because of something I couldn't name yet. A sharp instinct, like I was about to walk into a truth I wasn't ready to face. I looked up at the window again. Inside, the desk lamp was still on. Ethan once told me the whole office shut its lights off after 10 to save energy. The clock on my dashboard was nearing midnight. I could hear my heartbeat in my chest, fast and rough, reminding me that something about this wasn't normal. I tried to calm myself. Maybe he really was busy. Maybe he just forgot to turn the lights off. But the more I tried to believe it, the heavier my breath became. I held the food box close to my body, trying to find a bit of warmth. When I left the house, I'd only meant to do something sweet for Ethan. Something I hadn't done in months. But now, standing here, the distance from the parking lot to the front door felt endless. Every step would drag along the fear I'd been avoiding. Part of me wanted to go back to the car, drive home, and pretend everything was fine. The other part told me that if I didn't walk in tonight, I'd lose him completely. These past few weeks, Ethan kept talking about deadlines and unexpected meetings. Those lines became so routine that I stopped asking for details. Every night he came home in a rush, the scent of office cologne still fresh, and a faint smile that barely looked like anything at all. I used to know his real smile, warm, slow, and aimed straight at me. But this one was different. It felt like a mask, a cover. One evening, my child sat at the dinner table and asked, "Where's Dad, Mom?" All I could say was that he was busy. I said it so often the words lost meaning. Ethan no longer ate dinner with the three of us. He didn't talk about his day. He didn't wrap his arms around me from behind while I washed dishes the way he used to. But what choked me the most wasn't that Ethan had changed. It was realizing, when I truly looked in the mirror, that I had changed in ways I didn't even notice. I remember the last time I stood in front of my closet and picked something that made me feel pretty. It wasn't just a while ago, it felt like ages. Too long. Lately, my hair was always tied up with an old band. My shirts had creases I didn't bother smoothing out. I kept telling myself, I'm fine. But the truth was, I was exhausted. I was running between work, emails, reports, and then coming home to kids, dinner, homework, laundry, trash, and 1,000 other little things. I stopped taking the time to really look at Ethan. I didn't have the energy to listen to him tell a story that wasn't important. And the worst part on weekends, when he reached for me, I usually pulled away and said I was tired. Back then I didn't think much of it. But now, standing in that cold parking lot and staring at the light still on in his office, I saw the distance I had helped create. I'd let life carry me so far that I didn't notice our marriage slowly cracking. A strong gust of wind blew through, and the little note I'd tucked under the food box slipped out. I bent down to pick it up, my hand shaking a little. On it were just a few words I'd scribbled in a rush. Make sure you eat something. A simple line. Something I used to say so naturally when we first got married. But reading it now, it felt like the voice of a woman trying to reach for something that had drifted too far away. I walked toward the building's entrance. Inside, it was so quiet I could hear the low hum of the air system. I looked at the glass door and my reflection appeared faint under the hallway lights. A woman holding a box of food like it was her last chance to understand what was happening. I asked myself, almost out loud, "When did I lose him?" No one answered. Just a long stretch of silence, cold and real. I took a deep breath, then placed my hand on the door handle. Whatever was inside, I knew I had to walk in. Not just to find answers about Ethan, but to find myself again in this marriage. So I pushed the door open and stepped into the lit-up darkness of his office, where the real drama began. The office door closed behind me, and the faint echo in the hallway pulled me back to the time when everything first started slipping out of my hands. It didn't happen because of some big, clear event. It was slow, quiet, like a tiny crack under a layer of paint that looked perfect. And I, caught in the chaos of work and life, didn't see it. It started the day my company went through restructuring. I was handed extra work without anyone asking if I had the time for it. Meetings stretched late into the evening. Reports had to be revised over and over for management, and my phone never stopped buzzing with emails. I tried to stay calm, tried to prove I wasn't overwhelmed, but my body felt different. I slept less, ate whatever was convenient, and constantly felt like I was running behind everything and still couldn't catch up. When I left the office at 6 or 7, I walked straight into a second shift at home. The kids needed help with homework, needed baths, needed things prepped for the next day. The house needed cleaning. Dinner needed cooking. I kept spinning between 3 roles: employee, mom, wife, and every one of them demanded more than I had to give. I remember one night when I was washing dishes, the clock close to 10, my hands shaking a little from how tired I was. Ethan came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and rested his chin on my shoulder. I should have turned around, hugged him back, asked about his day the way I used to, but all I could think about was the stack of files I still hadn't gone through. I said one flat line: "I'm really tired. Let's talk tomorrow." I didn't turn to look at him, and because I didn't, I never saw how quickly the disappointment in his eyes faded. The exhaustion pushed me away from Ethan without me realizing it. When I got home, all I wanted was a quick shower, get the kids settled, and collapse on the couch. Ethan would try to talk little things from work, ideas he had for the weekend, but I answered with short, empty replies. Many nights, he gently touched my hip just as I lay down. I knew he wanted closeness, wanted to reconnect, but my body felt like lead. I just pulled the blanket tighter and whispered, "I don't have the energy." Maybe if I had looked at him straight on back then, I would have seen his silence getting heavier little by little. From disappointment, Ethan shifted into silence. And from silence, he slowly pulled away from me. Not through arguments or blame. He just talked less, touched me less, asked fewer questions. The distance between us stretched out, inch by inch, like 2 people sitting on the same couch but no longer close enough to touch. But I didn't notice. Or maybe I was too worn out to notice. I was wrestling with things that felt too big, assuming our marriage could hold itself together. I kept telling myself this rough patch would pass. I didn't know that while I was running from one task to the next, Ethan had slowly stopped believing I'd ever get better. I remember one evening while I was clearing the dinner table, Ethan was on the sofa staring at his phone. I asked, "Are you okay?" He said, "I'm fine," without looking up. He used to always look at me when he answered, but that night, his reply felt like a door quietly closing, and I was too tired to reach out and keep it open. That's when the distance between us really started to build. Neither of us was completely at fault. I was so exhausted I didn't even know how much effort it took to keep love alive. Ethan was hurt because he felt like he was no longer an important part of my life. We both assumed the other person understood, but neither of us actually said anything. We were both waiting for the other to make the first move. I waited for Ethan to pull me close, to tell me things were okay, or that he missed me. Ethan waited for me to look at him a little longer, hug him when he walked through the door, or simply notice that he was tired in his own way. But every night I came home and dove straight into responsibilities, and Ethan slipped further into silence. Day after day, that pattern became our rhythm. No drama, no arguments, just cold. Cold enough that I didn't see how much farther I drifted from him, little by little. Looking back, I understand that distance in a marriage doesn't appear in a single moment. It comes from all the times we chose silence instead of honesty, from the times I let work take over everything, from the times Ethan needed me but didn't say it, from the way we forgot how to look at each other the way we did when we first got married. And it was that quiet, layered distance, not some dramatic event, not an argument that created the perfect empty space for something worse to slip in, something I never would have imagined back then. All I knew was that standing in Ethan's office hallway tonight, the fear I felt wasn't just because the lights were on at an odd hour. It was because of everything we had lost without either of us daring to face it. The truth was somewhere behind the door on the other side, and I knew. Part of that truth had started on the very days I thought I was just trying to get through life. I stood in Ethan's office hallway that night, and under that soft but cold light, I began to understand that the distance between us wasn't only built from my exhaustion. Something in him had changed too, and it started here. Ethan's world at work was nothing like the world he walked into at home. Here, the lights were bright and clean. There were no kids calling for dad, no cold dinners, no day-long fatigue hanging over him like a shadow. Around him were younger co-workers, full of energy, always excited, always fresh. This place made him the best version of himself. Confident, sharp, polished, the version that marriage, responsibilities, and family routines sometimes dimmed. Chloe was part of that world. She was younger than me, quick, and knew how to talk just enough to make someone feel important. I'd met her a few times at company events. She always carried this kind of energy that made people feel recharged. And Ethan, someone who loved being appreciated in a genuine way. Not flattered, must have found that comforting. At work, Chloe and a few others often talked about the way Ethan handled things, how he managed crises, how he spoke with clients. Every little line like, "You're really good at this," or, "Honestly, I learn a lot from you," hit the deepest part of Ethan, the part that always wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged. At first, Ethan kept his boundaries clear. He avoided private conversations, only responded when necessary, and stayed careful not to give off the wrong impression. He once mentioned to me in passing that Chloe was sweet but a little flirty, and I just laughed it off, thinking it was harmless. I didn't see the truth. When a man feels invisible at home, even the smallest compliment from the outside can become a kind of temptation that's hard to resist. Ethan fought it with all the logic he had, but logic only works when the heart is full. Every night he came home to a house where I was too tired to look at him for more than 3 seconds. Every time he tried to talk while I answered with short, empty lines. Those little things built up into a space, and space always looks for something to fill it. Temptation doesn't arrive like a crash. It comes in soft as a breath. One day, Ethan and Chloe started talking more about things that had nothing to do with work. Chloe opened up about her complicated childhood, her strict mother, the relationships that left her doubtful. And Ethan, being who he is, listened. After that, they had more small conversations in the hallway, little check-ins like, "You okay?" or "You look tired today." At some point, talking to Chloe became a pleasant routine. Then came the convenient dinners. Ethan came home later, not because of meetings, but because he and Chloe stayed to go over some tasks, just a few times, then often. And when people find a place that feels lighter, they return to it, even when they know it's not the right thing to do. Late night talks began. Office lights still on, the place quiet, and the two of them sitting across from each other, sharing things Ethan probably once wanted to tell me, but I no longer had the space to hear. Chloe talked for hours, and Ethan felt seen, understood, touched in parts of himself he'd kept hidden for too long. One night, every boundary broke, not because it was planned, not because Ethan meant for it to happen. It was just a moment where he felt wanted in a way he no longer felt at home. in that moment, he made the wrong choice, and after that, everything slid downhill. After that night, Ethan was no longer the man trying to keep his distance. He started finding reasons to stay at the office longer. An email he could have answered in the morning, he held off until late. A small task he could have sent to someone else, he chose to do himself. Chloe became the place he went for softness, lightness, and excitement. The things he didn't have at home anymore. I didn't know what had happened, but I felt clearly that my husband no longer belonged only to our family. The first sign I noticed was the scent of his cologne. Ethan hadn't changed fragrances in years, but one day when he brushed past me to grab his jacket, I caught a different smell. Light, sweet, nothing like anything I'd ever bought for him. When I asked, he just said, "I wanted a little change." Then came the way he dressed. Ethan started putting more effort into it. New shirts, new ties, his hair styled more neatly. Each thing made sense on its own. But when you put them together, they pointed to something I didn't want to think about. His phone also became something he never let go of. He kept it in his pocket or placed it face down on the table. Every time a notification popped up, he glanced at it, then looked at me with a hint of tension. When I asked who texted, he said, "Just the team." But his eyes didn't meet mine the way they used to. The part that hurt the most wasn't those changes. It was the distance between him and our kids. Ethan used to be the one who read bedtime stories, the one who taught them how to throw a ball, the one who tried to be there for every important moment. But lately, when the kids ran to hug him, Ethan just patted their heads quickly and said he was busy. When they asked, "Dad, can you play with me?" he answered, "Maybe another day." And that other day never came. And my intuition, the one I'd been ignoring for months, finally woke up. All it took was a small comment from Ethan, a distracted look, one moment where he flinched when I walked into the room. Each thing, on its own, was tiny, but together, they pricked at the edge of my awareness like needles. Something was wrong. Something bigger than burnout, bigger than exhaustion, bigger than the quiet distance between us. And that night at midnight, standing in front of his office with a box of food in my hands, I knew I couldn't pretend I didn't see it anymore. My intuition wasn't whispering now. It was clear, loud, steady, strong enough that even the excuses I used to comfort myself couldn't hold up. But as that panic tightened in my chest, another part of me was forced to look inward. I couldn't just think about how Ethan had changed. I had to face what I had let slip away too. I don't blame Ethan entirely. It sounds strange, especially as I was starting to see him becoming distant, secretive, and no longer the man who used to share everything with me. But looking back, I can see clearly that my own exhaustion played a bigger role than I ever admitted. I let work pressure swallow all my time. I let my fatigue answer his gentle questions for me. I let stress make me avoid intimacy with quick lines like, "I'm too tired." I thought I was just trying to survive, but really, I was letting our marriage fall into a long, heavy silence. This was the first time I truly dared to look at that, and it became the first real step forward I'd taken after months of running from the truth. So I started to change, not to cling to something out of desperation, but because I wanted to return to the version of myself I'd lost. I reorganized my workload, turned down a few meetings I didn't actually need to be in, and handed off tasks to coworkers. I gave myself slow mornings again, drinking water, taking deep breaths, setting a calmer tone before waking the kids. I picked a few outfits that made me feel good, not for anyone else, but to remind myself I still deserved care. I paid more attention to the kids, took them out on weekends instead of catching up on work. And when Ethan walked through the door, I tried creating small moments, a soft smile, a simple question about his day, my hand brushing his as we passed each other in the kitchen, But the surprising part was how he reacted. He pulled away, almost like the things I was trying to rebuild were pushing him back instead of drawing him in. One time I placed my hand on his shoulder while he was washing up after work. He flinched slightly, like he wasn't used to being touched by me anymore. Such a tiny moment, but it stung. Then Ethan's unusual behaviors started to become impossible to ignore. He almost never let me touch his phone anymore. Not by hiding it, but by holding it too tightly, like a reflex of defense. He used to leave it on the kitchen counter, screen unlocked, nothing to conceal. But lately, it was always in his pocket, and whenever a notification appeared, he'd shift his body slightly away from me. He began leaving for work earlier than usual, sometimes before the kids were even awake. I asked, "Why so early?" He just said, "Trying to catch up on things." But his voice drifted, and he didn't look me in the eye. When someone lies, they don't need to say something untrue. They just need to avoid meeting your gaze. Then one afternoon, he walked into the house with his shirt carrying a strange scent. Not cologne, the kind of scent that lingers when someone stands too close for too long. I was a few steps away, but I could still smell it. When I asked, Ethan tugged on his shirt and said a coworker accidentally spilled a bit of her perfume on him when they were standing close in a meeting room. The explanation sounded reasonable, until I realized he was talking a little too fast. I wanted to believe him, but my intuition was getting clearer by the day. The moment that really shattered everything happened one night while I was picking up the kids' toys in the living room. Ethan was in the kitchen, thinking I couldn't hear him, talking on the phone in a voice lower than usual. His tone softened in a way I hadn't heard in so long, gentle, like he was speaking to someone who made him feel at ease. I only caught a few scattered lines. "Yeah, I know. I'll try tomorrow." Then a long pause, where he didn't realize he was smiling. I stood behind the doorway, gripping a small toy in my hand. That wasn't the voice of someone discussing work. It was the voice of a man trying to keep intimacy hidden. When he hung up, I asked, "Who was that?" He didn't look at me. He just said, "The team, something urgent. I'll have to stay late at work." That line, "stay late at work," was the one he'd been using for months. But this time, I knew it wasn't that simple anymore. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen, the house so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. I knew I couldn't wait for the truth to reveal itself. I had to face it, even if it scared me enough to make my hands shake. I decided to make Ethan's favorite dish. Honey rosemary roasted chicken, the one I used to make every birthday. As I chopped the vegetables, my hands trembled a little, not because the knife was sharp, but because two opposite emotions were pulling me in different directions, love and suspicion. I wanted to reconnect with him. I wanted a chance to bring us closer again. But inside me, fear kept growing, the fear that when I brought this meal to him, I'd see something I didn't want to see. The night settled in slow and heavy. I put on my coat, picked up the food container, and locked the door gently so I wouldn't wake the kids. Sitting in the car, my palms were damp, my heart beat thudding like it already knew whatever I was about to face would change everything. Around midnight, I arrived at Ethan's office. The cold air cut against my face as I stepped out of the car. The parking lot was almost empty, only the sound of wind moving through the dark rows of trees. I looked up at the floor where Ethan worked. The lights were still on. Not the kind of light left on by accident, the kind that meant someone was still inside. As I got closer to the building's doors, I heard a small sound, a laugh. Not loud, but clear, familiar in its intimacy, and it wasn't Ethan's. I stopped. My breath caught in my throat. The food container in my hands suddenly felt heavier than my whole body. I walked toward the door, each step slow but steady, my heartbeat pounding in my chest like a drum. I knew the moment my hand touched that door handle would be the moment every last illusion disappeared. And still, I stepped forward. I stood at the office door, my hand on the cold handle until my fingers went numb. When I pushed it lightly, it opened without a sound. The desk lamp cast a narrow pool of light, and in that moment, I saw Ethan and Chloe. They were standing close, too close for anyone to call it professional. Chloe saw me first and jerked back, like my presence had sliced the air between them in half. Ethan turned around, his face draining of color, and in his eyes was something he couldn't hide, the shock of someone caught in a moment with no excuse left to reach for. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat was so dry that every breath felt like a crack opening inside my chest. I just spoke, my voice shaking and worn to the point I barely recognized it. When did you leave us? That question dropped into the room like something heavy. Chloe lowered her eyes, refusing to look at me. Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Finally, he let out a breath, not the kind someone makes when they're misunderstood, but the kind a person exhales when they're done hiding. It's been a while, he said, his voice rough and breaking. Longer than you think. My heart sank, not because of the confession, but because of the way he said it, steady and hurting. Like he'd rehearsed admitting this to himself over and over. I stood there, hearing the steady hum of the AC, feeling my heartbeat slow and heavy. I thought I would explode with anger, but instead, the first thing that came was an emptiness. Ethan stared at the floor. I felt like I didn't exist at home anymore, he said, each word dropping like a stone. I'm not saying that to justify anything. I was wrong, but I'd been feeling abandoned long before I did something this awful. I closed my eyes, not to avoid the truth, but because it hurt so much I needed a second of darkness to bear it. I understood what he meant. I understood it too well. My exhaustion, the distance I created, the long silence between us, all of it was real. I had let life swallow the softer parts of him without even noticing. I saw my part in it, and that realization tightened in my chest like a hand gripping from the inside. But there was one thing I knew for sure. Pain is never a valid reason for betrayal. I opened my eyes and looked at Ethan. I understand how you felt, I said, my voice catching. But you chose to hurt me instead of talking to me, and that will never be okay. My legs almost gave out then. The truth stood in front of me, so clear it felt suffocating. But I didn't reach for him. I didn't cling to someone who wasn't choosing to stay for me. The pain rose in heavy waves, and I had to steady myself against the desk just to stay upright. I spoke slowly, steadily, as if every word was a necessary cut to free myself. I can't change what you did, but I can change how I move forward. Ethan opened his mouth, like he wanted to stop me, but nothing came out, because he knew I was right. Chloe stayed still, silent, her eyes avoiding anything that might make the moment even worse. I turned away. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just walked out of that room, the place where I lost him, and also the place where I found clarity again. The time after that wasn't easy. Ethan had to face the consequences he created, the distance from the kids, the coldness from both families, and long nights with no one left to listen to his version of the truth. He wanted to fix things, but some fractures, once deep enough, never returned to their original shape. As for me, I focused on the kids and on myself. I learned how to rebuild my life without centering it around anyone other than my own inner worth. I spent time in therapy, time relearning how to listen to my body, how to care for wounds I had ignored for far too long. I learned how to love myself before even thinking about loving someone else. The pain didn't disappear right away, but it no longer controlled me. It became a reminder that I had lived honestly, loved deeply, and stood back up on my own. Now, When I think about that moment in front of the glowing office door, I don't shake anymore. I just remember this. Sometimes the truth arrives at the moment we fear it most, but it opens the door for us to return to ourselves. And that's how my story ends, not with revenge, but with the freedom I finally found.